And so we assembled a group of parents, faculty, and students to really do a lot of work, and I'm delighted that there have been so many constituencies working together to collaborate, and we've done a whole bunch of work. But as you can see, our mission statement is right here. It's kind of lengthy, but just overall, you can see that what we're trying to do is promote and support education around interpersonal relationships, right, that reflect our values at school. So our aim as a group 3 years ago was to guide the school towards a comprehensive approach that teaches students how to build healthy relationships, to honor consent from the earliest ages, and to understand sexuality from a sex-positive, values-guided perspective. I'll talk a little bit more about that. So when we talk about what we're teaching, we know that healthy relationships, we're talking about a whole lot more than sex, right? We're talking about how to build healthy relationships, not just with intimate partners, right? But with family, friends, teachers, coworkers, our whole community. We're talking about conflict resolution, honoring consent from the youngest ages, and when we're talking about consent at the youngest ages, we're talking about body autonomy, how to ask for a hug, how to respect another person's body, so that if and when a person does become involved in an intimate partnership, they understand consent from the very beginning in an affirmative way. We're talking about sex-positive, values-based sex ed, and when we are we all familiar with what sex-positive means?
No.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. So this is the old approach, and probably all of us around the table, and maybe some lucky ones among us, experienced a sex education that was not like the disaster model, which is like don't do this thing, everything is going to be awful, and we're not going to talk about this. So sex positive is really about not focusing on tragedy and disease, or teen pregnancy and all the awful things that will happen when you engage in this one thing. But we're talking about it being a normal, typical part of the human experience, including focusing on consent. And when children are older in an age-appropriate way, we can talk about pleasure and how to have a healthy relationship. So we're just really talking about broadening our view of sex and sexuality, that we're not in this narrow box of intercourse, right, and pregnancy, that we're talking about this being a part of the human experience. And so sex positivity really understands this as a fundamental part of being human, right, being alive. And that what we really want to do is to talk about it without euphemism or without shame and embarrassment, because as we know, as adults who maybe have experienced a sort of shame or shaming around sex and sexuality, it's not healthy. So when we're talking about sex positive, that's what that means. Anti-bullying efforts, restorative practices. So part of our work too is how to help guide the school with restorative practices, and that is kind of an alternative way of being, right? So we want to restore harm. When harm has been done, how can we restore the harm instead of a sort of traditional disciplinary process? So that's part of healthy relationships too. We're talking about building healthy body image. So just celebrating the diversity of bodies, different sizes, different types, different abilities, and lots more. So ultimately, what we see is that this work is about connection, right? How we connect with one another. So that's when we're talking about kids from the youngest ages, we want to talk about connections and the abuse of power. What we're doing as a school, right, is trying to build a more just community and a more just society. And we know that working together around healthy interactions is really critical to that work. So and when I just mentioned, power-based, so we know that power-based violence is preventable. This is just a little bit about our work in the upper school, where we have really responded to sexual violence in a very different way. We're focusing on survivor-centered care. We have what I think is a really robust way to care for students, and I can talk about that a little more if people have questions, but I just want to mention that. What I really love about the work that we're doing as a school, I'm going to pass these around. This is Circles of Sexuality. So this is sort of the framework where we are working from. We have identified through the work of the task force a curriculum. So part of our work was really evaluating curricula nationally and internationally. And what we landed upon What we think aligns best with us as a school is a curriculum called Our Whole Lives. And Our Whole Lives, if you look at these circles, right, in the middle, central to this work are values. So the values that we have as a school align with the values of OWL, which is short for Our Whole Lives. Self-worth, sexual health, responsibility, justice, and inclusivity. And so we know that this is sort of mission-driven work to us as a Quaker school, that these are values-based conversations and really fundamental to our educational goals. And so when we talk to students about values, we're talking about our values as a school, the values that you see, the OWL values of self-worth, health, responsibility, and inclusivity, and also always we're encouraging students to be understanding the values of their family and themselves, and that is sort of central to all of this stuff. Is what are your values as a student and your family? I should also say that we know that parents and caregivers are the teachers. You're the primary teachers, so we know that we have to do this work in partnership with parents. So right after this chat, actually, I'm going to be running over to the lower school. They're doing monthly meetings, and everybody's invited for lower school parents, but I'm sure the invitation is open to everyone. Monthly talks about what the school is doing and how to talk to your child from the youngest ages about sex and sexuality. So the circles, this is the foundation of the work, and what you can see is that if you look at the sexual health and reproduction circle, which is that one in the, I guess, lower left hand side, intercourse, right? It's right in the middle. That's kind of where students start. Like in our upper school grades, we take our data, right, we've been doing this since 2017, so the 9th and 10th grades in the upper school receive Our Whole Lives education by a team of educators. And so in the beginning of the class, we ask every student, what is your definition of sexuality? And so it's anonymous, they all write their definition. It's usually like, what's between your legs, who you're attracted to, intercourse, right? This one little thing in there that some people will do, not every person will do in life. And by the end of the course, when we ask that question again, I actually think I have a slide about this here. What we know is that the conclusion is, these are actual words that kids have used, different personal values and components a person uses to express themselves, how we communicate about what we want in a relationship. And my favorite is a normal part of life. Like when adolescents say something is normal, that's great, right? Like really, yes, this is normal. And so they come to this often lots of giggles, red faces, shame, and by the end, there is a much broader understanding of what sexuality is. So that's really what we're looking at, which I think is really exciting. So I'll just give you a brief overview of, I want to be mindful of our time, of sort of where we are as a school. So in the lower school, I also want to say that we had a 3-day Our Whole Lives training at Friends School, and teachers from every division attended. I know Laura joined us for a bit. So we had a 3 full-day training about this Our Whole Lives curriculum, and again, teachers from every division came, we're broadening the conversation, and I think what's really unique about our school is we're the only school that's doing this work. So we as a country, as a society, are woefully behind. We're in sex education. But our school, I think, has a lot of energy around this because we know that this is sort of the work that we must be talking with kids about. Not sex, but critical thinking. Like we're really just talking about critical thinking skills. We're not talking about how to have sex or how not to have sex. So we know that kids go to sex and gender school every day. My colleague and our local sex educator, Debbie Rothman, says that, and she partners with us too at Friends. But they're going to sex and gender school. They come to school with their peers. They learn cues from their peers. They learn cues from media. They learn from their teachers. So they are learning this stuff. And so if we're not naming it and we're not talking about it with kids, we are way behind. So we've got a lot of unlearning to do ourselves to be able to have these conversations with our kids. But we can do it, and we get there step by step. And as a school, I feel so lucky to be with these colleagues who are really dedicated to this work. So in the lower school, science educators, Racely Barreto and David McGivney, they have completely revamped their science curriculum to be aligned with the national standards. So that in and of itself is pretty remarkable. However, the human body is not part of the national standards in the lower school, but we know that it needs to be. So what they are doing, they're working with the youngest ages, they're working in pre-K, and I talked with Racely recently about this, I wanna make sure I'm speaking, accurately capturing her work. So in the pre-K, what they're doing is really just addressing the components of human sexuality, right, in an age-appropriate way. They have a clear understanding of how their bodies work and how to name it, right? So they're talking about functions. They're not using slang, it's just science, right? So they're talking about the heart, what the heart looks like. It doesn't look like, this. Right now they're doing hand sewing of an actual heart shape. So they're doing fine motor work, and they're talking about how the heart works and how it looks and how it beats in the same way that they're talking about a vulva and a penis and gluteus, right? So they're not using slang. They're talking about just science terms. And as they get older in the lower school, they discuss the changes that happen through puberty, right? And just as a species, right? What do we do with the human species? And through this work, there is empathy. When the science teachers talk about a boy who may get a spontaneous erection in class in the lower school or the middle school, and they talk about this matter-of-factly, it takes away the shame, right? This is just a part of a natural process. We all know that humans will have these changes, and if we all have the language around it, it doesn't become a shameful, embarrassing part of life. It just becomes a thing that happens to the human species. And so that's really what the work that they're doing in the lower school. In the 4th grade is when there's a much more significant lesson about human sexuality and reproduction, and then there's a refresher course in the 5th grade. They are not talking about contraception in the lower school, just as an FYI. In the middle school, we work with Planned Parenthood educators, and they do 6 one-hour sessions per grade per year. They also, in the middle school, are working with our peer educators. So in the upper school, we have peer educators that work with the 8th grade class, and they are also talking about healthy relationships, and they're talking about substance use and relationships, digital citizenship, and just ways to interact with one another. So they get, and they have a life skills class too, which covers some of this. And they also are working on restorative practices as well. So in the upper school, in the 9th and 10th grades, they do a semester of sex ed with OWL, Our Whole Lives. So 9th and 10th grades each have a semester. And then the alternate semester with each of those grades is about community, race, and identity. We also have a course of peer educators. So our Planned Parenthood of Maryland comes to teach a course of upper school students who then become peer educators for their peers. So this year what they're doing is they've led small group sessions with the 9th grade on consent, affirmative consent, helping kids understand substance use and consent and the intersection there. And also they'll be doing the same small group with the 11th grades, and we will be working to assemble some pre-prom small group sessions, which they did last year too, which was really helpful. Kids love, adults can talk about this stuff until the cows come home, but if their peers are talking about it, it is much more meaningful to them. So we know that there's real importance there. We also are doing a parent ed evening. You're all welcome. It's an upper school evening, but Al Vernacchio, who is a figure educator and author, a nationally known sex educator, he's phenomenal. He'll be coming to talk with our parents on April 1st. So he'll be here.
Is that more after school focus?
It's an invitation to upper school parents that I'm encouraging Steve, and I'm sure he will be happy to open this to the whole school. And we can talk more about that, and if we want all families to come so that we can help out.
His book, Forgiveness Sex, is amazing.
It's great, yes.
Yes.
And also-
Ready for you guys?
Do we have time for questions?
Yes.
Okay. Absolutely.
Quick question. So, at the Friends School, is like, we're kind of in this bubble, and so do you guys teach how to respond to, outside influences that are not at Friends, but
Like?
People that have been taught
I don't know, yeah, I mean, it's like, cause I've noticed here in Baltimore, I'm not from here originally, but, you know, kids interact with other kids from other schools all the time.
Yeah.
And so, is there, like, if the talk is different, or that it's, you know, there's a little bit of shaming going on, like, do you teach the kids how to react to it and answer that?
I think yes, particularly because we spend so much time talking about values, and so I think I can speak for myself and my colleagues in the upper school, and I'm quite sure it's clear it's the same in others, that we're always emphasizing your family values are very different from another family's values, and the only way we as parents can teach our kids what those are is to say our family believes this, and it's important that our students have that understanding, but also we share, not everybody will be in the same place and have the same values. So it's just and having healthy conversations with other children, I think, is part of that, right? Like respecting other people's boundaries, letting people know that not everybody has the same language, understands the same things, is willing to talk about the same things. So in that way, yes, we do. I should also be clear that at Friends, even though we are doing some of this work, and we still need to be doing more work, and we know that, there's still sexual violence, there is still sexism and racism and all of the things that we experience in our larger society. We are a school in that society, and so that still happens here. There are still instances where our students are surviving sexual violence. And so the work, and this is why it's really critical that we do this for the youngest ages, because by the time they get to the upper school, it is way too late. We are unlearning all the things. And so there's just no scaffolding throughout their life because they're getting their education from the media and from porn and from each other. And especially if they're not talking about it at home, it's just like the Wild West.
Right. So my daughter's in 6th grade and they're starting to Planned Parenthood. I didn't feel that as a parent, I really knew this was coming, which is fine. I mean, we talk about it at home. But is there any way to maybe what they're learning in each grade, we could maybe get something at home so that we're continuing the conversation? Because also the unlearning that you're talking about, I was taught a certain way. Abby's being taught a certain, she's talking about how you use pronouns, we clearly never grew up with things like that. So is there a way to maybe integrate as they're learning, we're learning with them so that we're having the same sort of discussions? Because I'm feeling she's coming home telling me these things, and I want to feel that I can have a healthy conversation with her and continue what she's learning.
That's the goal.
Okay, and I'm not, and that's sort of where I feel like I want to make sure I'm, continuing it, not the right way, but in a continuing the positive and not sort of putting in my bad.
I had the shade model. I had the disaster model. It was and I've been involved with this work. It's really the unlearning. It takes some time for us. And yes, we need education. Parents need education, and that is the goal. That when your children are receiving sex ed, you are also receiving sex
I
ed.
just feel sometimes I'm saying things and then I'm like, because of course I'm like, well, you shouldn't do this. Let's wait till we're old. You don't. I understand.
Yeah.
But so I want to say it in what you're saying, a positive manner.
The book that Vivian recommended, For Goodness Sakes,
Read that.
I highly recommend that book.
Read it.
We have it here at the library at school, and you're welcome to take our books here. So,
and then when we were talking about educating the parents so you know what to talk about, I find that what I found was that when you're talking about the kids interacting with others, in some ways it's actually more the parents, because the parents are sitting in the bleachers on the sidelines with other parents through other sports or arts or whatever, and they're like, oh, your kid goes to Friends. Oh yeah, you guys have that radical sex education kind of thing, and I'm like, radical? It's just just educating.
yeah, I love that.
Yeah,
we have
that
that representation though.
My daughter's in the 8th grade and they just finished their Planned Parenthood unit, and she was sharing, I hadn't heard very much, and then one day she just let it all out and she shared everything, and it was wonderful. And her one comment, well, she had lots of comments, but her one thing was she was talking about consent, because I had asked specifically about consent, and she said, yeah, and they show you you know, we've seen everything from like a cycle of a bad relationship, and they show us video and, you know, what you're supposed to say, but she's like, I don't really feel like it happens that way. Like, somebody asks if it's okay, do you wanna kiss me, or is it okay if I kiss you, or, and so I'm just curious, like, because that's a relatively, I think, new concept, is that really playing out? Like, what do you hear, like, from upper
Yes.
schoolers? Cause my reaction was, well, this is what people do now, and I think it probably is happening, and if you can't talk about it, you're not supposed to be doing it, which I know from Alabama,
Right.
right. But
Yes.
I'm just curious, is it really
Yes.
playing out that way?
I do think so. Not always, and
Yeah.
because I
Sure.
think, and then in the upper school, not everybody has the same sex ed. Obviously, all of our families are different. We're all coming from different places. But yes, in the past 3 years since we've been doing this work, I've seen the needle move. Where this is just when we're talking about affirmative consent, something more than the absence of no, right? When we say affirmative consent, we use the FRIES acronym. So it's freely given, it's reversible, it's informed, so you know exactly what you're doing, it's enthusiastic, and it's specific. And so yes, we are talking about you need to know exactly what you're doing. And if you say yes to a kiss, that doesn't mean that you're saying yes to something else.
Right.
And so we are inviting students to be affirmative with their consent when they're engaging, because otherwise it's just, well, it's an absence of no. And that, as we know, is not consent. So it just feels awkward for kids because they haven't been talking about it since pre-K. Like they just slam into each other and give each other hugs, you know? And if we can begin to invite them to say, I'd really like to give you a hug. And then we can say, the other person might not want a hug. Or even when we're interacting with our families, like go give Uncle Joe a hug. Well, maybe you don't want to give Uncle Joe a hug, you know? So how do you say, how about a fist bump? Whatever it is, you know, to just give them the language at the earliest ages. Not only they can keep themselves safe if they are in a situation where they need the language, but so that as they get older and begin to explore, those that will explore will have language that's helpful and useful. It is awkward because sex is awkward. So that's and kids are awkward. The whole thing is awkward.
So you talked a lot about the sort of the continuum from very young to older, but now these days with how we're doing admissions within the school, I mean, you know, like half the 9th grade class is new to Friends.
Yes.
You know, half the 6th grade class is new to Friends. How do you play catch up essentially for kids that come from schools where they may not have gotten any sex ed?
So we rely a lot on peer pressure. So we hope that peers, and you know, the peers are they are the teachers, and so kids know. So if their peers have a particular knowledge base, then the hope is that I mean they're the ones interacting with each other at parties and outside of school, and also you know. And this is something that we're thinking about a lot because it's true that we have a whole bunch of new kids. And how do we fill those gaps? So some of it is in the upper school, we have Smart Start. We're thinking differently about how we're going to address this in Smart Start, which is the week where new students come together. This summer, what we hope to do cross-divisionally is have a week in the summer where everybody that is involved in this work gets together so we can really answer questions like that and be very planful about just even the language that we use. Like, I think in the lower school they talk about human sexuality, in the middle school they talk about sex ed, in the upper school we talk about healthy relationships. Like, what are we talking about? How are we naming it? So that we feel like there's a continuum. So we do have work to do, but yes, you're right. There is that discrepancy. Some kids come to there was a student who was coming for an admission shadow day. And he walked into the room as I was saying the word clitoris. And this is a student who has never been, like, he's from another school, just visiting friends, and, you know, just walked into the room in mid-sentence. So it's a delicate balance.
Just a quick follow-up to what Robin was saying. For Planned Parenthood in particular, I mean, is there a written curriculum or any sort of a guidance document that is or can be made available to parents so that, you know, if my kid comes home and says, well, we just talked about this, I can go and say, oh, let me pull this up and have it, or something like that. I'm just wondering if there's any kind of way to make that available, or if it is and I just don't know.
So, yes, and I will ask, Laura Locker, the middle school counselor who coordinates those lessons, and Tony also, the assistant principal. I'm gonna ask them, I know they use their own curriculum, Planned Parenthood has their own curriculum. The topics are similar, but I will ask that question, because it's really important that parents have that information. So I will follow up.
Yeah, I think in middle school in particular, that grade, that point in development.
Wasn't there like a parent information
I was gonna say
portal
that,
Yes.
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 that
There's
you could go to?
a coffee.
Yeah, there was something
Yeah.
with the Planned Parenthood's
Yes.
person or
But those are
staff.
hard to,
Those are hard for everybody to,
hard for
yeah.
people to get to.
And it would be nice to have, I mean, when Abby told me they put a condom on a banana, I smiled, didn't know what to say. It's like things like that would have been nice to know
Right.
they were starting to talk about.
You can react in private and then
I
like
did,
answer in public,
I
right?
just said, huh. But
Yes.
I'm just saying, it would have been nice to kind of have, and if she didn't shock me, I'm aware of why.
Yeah, of course, yes.
But like, I need to, know.
Yes, yeah.
And a lot of middle schoolers won't tell you anything. So
Yeah, and so
you
that
really
way I
don't
kind
know.
of feel,
Right.
yeah. Oh yeah, that was it.
That was pretty much right, I got that on the hand.
I would say at the lower school level though, they're doing a good job of messaging and letting you know what's coming, and they gave us a list of recommended books, so I bought that for my daughter earlier and, you know, she looked through it. So maybe they could extend that to some of the other levels.
There is a little button on My Friends, it hasn't been updated in a while, but it's a healthy relationships button, and you can, there's recommended reading there too. I can try and see if I can figure this out.
With Planned Parenthood also, my understanding is there's always a friend's teacher in the room, so you could also follow up with that too. If there's a question about what was said or.
Okay, there we go, there it is. So right there, this is outdated, but the information is still relevant. And there are lots of links here for parents, right? So there are bunches of websites and books. I really like Al Bernacchio's resource list here, and this will take you right to his, so there's just a whole bunch of books here and resources for parents and for kids. So I would recommend you take a peek at that on My Friends when you get a chance. There's really good resources here.
Other questions? Shut this down. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.